Principle number one, three-dimensional movement. There's three dimensions that the body moves through: in the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, and the transverse plane. This is going to be the basis for our functional training. If we understand how the body moves in all three dimensions, we're going to be able to train it efficiently and effectively in all three planes of movement. Let's go over the sagittal plane. That is when we move forward and back in the sagittal plane. If I walk forward, it's in the sagittal plane. If I raise my arm, flexion and extension, it's in the sagittal plane. Frontal plane movement involves abduction and adduction, side bending, or lateral movement. The transverse plane rotates on an axis, so it's all rotational type movements. Okay? Not to confuse you all, but I want you to think about pins through the body. So if I had like a skewer going through my body, through my sides, I would pivot on that pin in the sagittal plane. I'd pivot on a pin if a pin goes through my shoulder. The frontal plane, the pin would go front to back. So I'd pivot on this motion. Pivot, a pin going through my shoulder on that motion. The transverse plane has a vertical component. Vertical pin that goes right down through the body, and then I rotate on that axis. So I can add in a frontal plane but still rotate too. Shoulder movement, horizontal adduction, horizontal abduction, pivots on that point. So it's not a frontal plane. Just because I said abduction and adduction, which means frontal plane, I added in the horizontal. So my arm moves in the transverse plane because of that pin orientation. Again, a vertical pin allows us to rotate. Movements and function involves all three planes of movement. One may be greater than the other. For example, in the golf swing, it's primarily a transverse plane movement. However, there's arc components of the sagittal plane and frontal plane involved in that. Walking, you would appear that it's mainly a sagittal plane movement. However, from a superior view, we would see that our shoulders would be rotating on a transverse plane axis and our pelvis on a transverse plane axis. As we take a step, there's a lateral shift in the body to keep us upright. That's in the frontal plane. So we'll be exploring all different kinds of exercises that incorporate three-dimensional movement involving the frontal plane, sagittal plane, and transverse plane. Again, this will be the basis for our functional training and understanding of why we do what we do with functional exercises.